For 30 years, they were titans of Seattle's digital world, but Eleanor Vance and Martha Hayes only knew one purpose: the total, relentless destruction of the other. Their careers were monuments to ruthlessness, built upon the ruins of shattered family ties and decades of profound isolation. Now, at 72 and 70, they find themselves trapped side by side in a sterile hospital room, stripped of their titles and facing the cold, undeniable reality of mortality. Will the threat of death finally force these two old rivals to confront the lifetime of resentment they carry, or will they take their bitter war to the very end? Join us now for this deeply moving story of second chances. Subscribe to Touching Tales to witness the unexpected fate of two women who learned too late what truly matters. The rain in Seattle was an old familiar sorrow, a relentless gray curtain drawn across the sky that swallowed the city's light. Inside the University of Washington Medical Center, even the pristine white walls and the polished linoleum floors could not entirely dispel the interior gloom. It was a place where people were forced to confront the lack of control, a concept Eleanor Vance, at 72 years old, found utterly infuriating. Eleanor lay rigid in a semi-private room on the 7th floor. Her tailored navy blue pajamas and the laminated color-coded printout of her meticulously planned hourly recovery schedule taped rigidly to her bedside tray table were a desperate attempt to impose order on the chaos of her recovery. She might have been retired for years, but the need for strategic command, the careful manipulation of time, and the pursuit of optimal efficiency still governed her days. Lying here dependent on the soft rhythmic beep of a monitor was an insult to a woman who had once commanded the entire Pacific Northwest digital marketing scene, barking orders from a corner office overlooking the rain-slicked Puget Sound. A quick impersonal knock preceded the arrival of a young nurse and an orderly pushing a gurney. Eleanor sighed, pulling the privacy curtain an inch tighter. She had hoped for solitude, having paid extra for the semi-private room, but the hospital was as they had warned when she checked in, operating at an unprecedented capacity. The gurney was gently positioned on the other side of the room. A frail but still visibly dignified woman was carefully transferred to the second bed. She was 70, perhaps 71, with tired, distant eyes and a persistent dry cough that immediately scraped across Eleanor's tightly wound nerves. Eleanor reluctantly parted the curtain just enough to offer a polite, distant nod, a gesture she reserved for distant business acquaintances. Then the world seemed to shift, the very air in the room turning heavy and cold. The woman on the other bed turned her head slightly. Her face etched with fine lines, and the exhaustion of chronic respiratory issues was immediately horrifyingly recognizable. The cold, intelligent light in her pale blue eyes was the exact same light that had 3 decades ago signaled the beginning of a relentless corporate war. Eleanor, the woman, rasped, her voice thin, but carrying the ghost of its old imperious tone. Martha Eleanor returned the name, tasting like cold steel on her tongue. It was Martha Hayes. 30 years. 30 years since they had last stood face to face, their bitter rivalry defining an entire era of Seattle's aggressive tech marketing boom. They had used every tactic, every resource, every whispered rumor to ensure the other failed. A profound, awkward silence settled, punctuated only by the steady drum of rain against the window. The attending nurse, blissfully unaware of the psychological battlefield she had just created, smiled brightly. "You two look like you know each other. That's wonderful. I'm so sorry, Ms. Vance. We are absolutely maxed out tonight. You two are stuck together for a little while." Eleanor's jaw tightened. She reached for the call button on her remote. "I see. I must insist on a transfer the moment something opens up. This is quite frankly highly undesirable." Martha merely watched her, a ghost of her infamous competitive smirk played on her lips, still fighting the inevitable Eleanor. Some things truly never change. This throwaway comment, a subtle jab, ignited a flash of old rage in Eleanor. She shot back, her voice low and steady. "And some things do, Martha. You seem to have finally lost your voice, the one you used to ruin my proposal on the 2005 Q4 budget review." She used the full year, emphasizing the distance of time and the sharpness of the memory. "That wasn't my voice, dear. That was simply the truth catching up to your overblown metrics." The subtle, venomous exchange ceased abruptly when Martha was seized by a painful, rattling bout of coughing. It sounded profoundly unhealthy, like sandpaper scraping against lung tissue. Eleanor was forced to listen to the visceral sound of Martha's physical decline. The sheer helplessness of the moment, being forced to witness her greatest enemy's weakness in this clinical, undeniable way, was jarring. Later that evening, the reality of their respective loneliness set in. Eleanor's daughter, who lived on the East Coast, had sent a large, impersonal bouquet and a text message that read, "Hope the hardware works. See you soon." There was no warmth, only obligation. Eleanor remembered the reason deliberately missing her daughter's engagement party in 2010 to finalize the acquisition of the biggest cloud-based ad platform in the state, a platform Martha was also bidding on. She had won that battle, but the peace with her family had dissolved entirely. Martha, meanwhile, received only a brief visit from her son, who spent 10 minutes speaking loudly on his phone about a market downturn before rushing out. The sterile, empty silence after visiting hours amplified their isolation. Eleanor was visited by a physical therapist around 9 p.m. While gently flexing her knee, the therapist cheerfully commented on Eleanor's impressive career. "You must have had a lot of support over the years to reach those heights." Eleanor paused, looking up at the ceiling where the fluorescent lights cast a dull glow. Support. The word felt meaningless. The trophy she had won over Martha felt like dust. Martha, curled on her side, watched Eleanor through half-closed eyes. "Tell me, Eleanor." Martha called out softly, her voice weak from the persistent tickle in her chest. "Did all that winning ever feel worth it?" Eleanor did not answer right away. She looked out at the insistent, drizzling rain of Seattle, the same rain that had accompanied her entire ascension up the corporate ladder since 1985. She saw her reflection pale and frail in the dark glass. No power, no titles, only a 72-year-old woman in a bed. The price, Eleanor finally admitted, a quiet confession hanging in the sterile air between the two beds. The price was far higher than the prize. That is the truth I found out too late. Martha nodded slowly, closing her eyes. The sound of her shallow, labored breathing was the only response. The two women united not by friendship, but by the shared, inescapable consequence of a life spent in brutal rivalry, spent the rest of the dark night separated only by a thin beige curtain and decades of regret. The next morning the room felt smaller, the tension thicker. Neither woman had slept well. The rhythmic sounds of the hospital, the muffled voices, the distant squeak of carts only emphasized their isolation, but the silence between them was far louder. Martha, propped up slightly, sipped lukewarm coffee from a styrofoam cup, her gaze steady on Eleanor. Eleanor was attempting to focus on her laminated recovery schedule, futilely moving a small red magnetic marker to indicate pain medication on her strict timeline. They knew the standoff was over. The confrontation was inevitable. Project Phoenix Martha finally began naming the infamous 2005 marketing campaign. The one where you somehow convinced the client to cut my team's budget by 30% the night before my final presentation. Eleanor put down her magnetic marker, her expression cool, the same look she used to flatten competition in a boardroom. "I didn't convince them to cut your budget, Martha. I simply presented the board with an optimized algorithmic allocation strategy that showed your proposed spend was inefficient by 30%. I used your own firm's confidential data, mind you. You used leaked data." Martha countered, her voice gaining strength, carrying the bite of old resentment. Data that should have been sealed until the Q1 performance review. That move cost me the client and nearly bankrupted my entire division. All's fair in love and digital marketing, isn't it? Eleanor shot back, a muscle twitching in her cheek. Especially when you were busy trying to block my protege, Stephen, from that vice president seat by spreading those absurd rumors about his expense reports in 2012. The exchange wasn't a shouting match. It was a cold, clinical recounting of corporate warfare, devoid of immediate fury, yet deeply chilling in its precision. They were two masters reviewing their past battles, each move calculated, ruthless, and highly specific to the cutthroat tech world of Seattle's consulting scene. Martha leaned back, the memory clearly causing her chest pain, though she fought to hide it. She recalled another incident, the AdTech Summit of 1998. I remember when I finally secured the keynote spot at the summit, Martha said, a flicker of pride and subsequent devastation in her eyes. My biggest break. 2 hours before I went on stage, someone accessed my presentation file and changed all my key performance indicators, the KPIs, to show a 20% loss instead of the 20% gain we had achieved. Eleanor offered a dry, short cough. A rookie error. Martha. Always save your final presentation as a non-editable PDF. A good leader never exposes her flanks. It was you, Eleanor. You had one of your contacts at the venue security desk bribe a technician. That move, that one single act of professional malice, cost me the pivotal Oracle partnership that would have defined my career. Martha's voice was tinged with decades of pain. Eleanor countered with a story of her own, equally devastating. And you used the press, didn't you? That anonymous quote you gave the Seattle Times in 2008 about my cold leadership style and inhumane restructuring, that quote cost me the trust of my entire senior management team, leading to a mass resignation right when I needed them most for the Microsoft project. As they spoke, the true devastating cost of their ambition began to surface, extending far beyond job titles and contracts. It wasn't just the job, Eleanor. Martha whispered, her gaze distant, fixed on a spot on the ceiling. The stress of constantly defending my ground, of losing those battles. It was too much for my marriage. My ex-husband used my absence, my obsession with beating you, against me in court. I lost custody of my son in 2006. He grew up barely knowing me. I paid lawyers a fortune, but the truth was, you had already stolen my attention and therefore my time with him. A tear tracked silently down her wrinkled cheek, landing on the crisp white sheet. Eleanor stared at the opposite wall, her usual composure cracking. I missed my daughter's engagement. I justified it as providing for her future, securing the wealth. But the truth is, I wanted to win that 2010 deal because I knew you wanted it. It was about proving my superiority. That desperate, consuming need to win became an addiction that separated me from my own family. A profound moment of silence followed, heavier than the Seattle rain. They were looking not at each other, but at the massive empty spaces in their lives, spaces carved out by their mutual hatred. Both women, once titans, were reduced to two aging figures, haunted by the same loneliness. Then Martha shifted again, pulling her blanket up higher. You know, for all the ugliness, I have to admit something, Eleanor. You were the only one who truly understood my ambition. No one else in the firm was operating on our level. Everyone else was simply a footnote. Eleanor turned her head slowly, a rare, genuine expression of surprise on her face. You had the vision, Martha, the groundbreaking, creative instinct. I always lacked that. I was the strategist, the meticulous executioner. You were the visionary, but you were impatient, always rushing the delivery. The painful admission hung in the sterile air. If we had ever combined our strengths, imagine what we could have built. The realization of their wasted potential for collaboration instead of competition was a shared crushing weight. The third night arrived at the hospital quiet and heavy. The Seattle rain had intensified into a severe thunderstorm that rolled in over Puget Sound, rattling the windows. The distant thunder seemed to echo the internal turmoil of the two women, amplifying the loneliness of their sterile room. A night nurse checked Martha's vitals and adjusted her oxygen mask. "You need to stay one more night, Martha. The doctor wants to run those pulmonary function tests again in the morning." Martha closed her eyes, and a single transparent tear escaped from beneath her eyelid, tracing a slow path down her wrinkled temple. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. "I just want to go home." "We all do, dear," the nurse said, gently patting her shoulder before leaving. Eleanor watched Martha's shoulders begin to shake silently. This was not the ruthless Martha Hayes she remembered. This was a terrified old woman facing her mortality. Eleanor felt an unexpected surge of protective sympathy, an emotion so foreign it was almost painful. Martha Eleanor called out softly, breaking the silent, rigid pact of distance. "Are you in pain?" Martha shook her head, turning slightly toward the wall, her weak cough now muffled by the pillow. "It's not the physical pain, Eleanor. It's the fear. The fear that I haven't done anything meaningful. All those years chasing titles and crushing rivals, destroying relationships for an extra percentage point on the stock options. What was the point if I end up here alone, fighting for every breath with nothing but old bitterness for company?" Eleanor remembered her own moment of terror on the operating table. "When I was going under, the last thing I thought about wasn't my bank account balance in 2022. It was the petty argument I had with my daughter last Christmas, the one where I criticized her life choices. It's always the connections we neglect that come back to haunt us, isn't it? The trophies just turned to dust." They began to talk openly, tracing the contours of their lives without the usual malice. The bitterness faded, replaced by the crushing weight of their shared fate. They spoke about the energy they had wasted, the sleepless nights spent devising traps for each other, and the sheer intellectual brilliance they had brought to the battle. "We built our careers on cutting-edge digital content marketing," Martha mused, pulling the oxygen mask slightly away from her mouth. "We should have collaborated on a memoir. Two titans of the industry revealing the true cost of success. Imagine the revenue and the insight we could have given younger women." Eleanor actually chuckled, a dry, rusty sound that hadn't escaped her throat in years. "We could have opened the most successful boutique strategy firm in the whole country back in 2000. You on the creative floor generating breakthrough ideas, me in the war room flawlessly executing the strategy. We could have doubled our success, had a fortune, and maybe even a working friendship." Martha's voice was suddenly full of a terrible longing. "If only, Eleanor. If only I hadn't torpedoed your early idea for the interactive ad campaigns. We'd have been billionaires by 2015. This thought, the full realization of their wasted potential, the empire that never was, struck them with devastating force. The tragedy of time. Eleanor instinctively reached for her aching hip, the movement reminding her of her physical fragility. She looked at the laminated schedule taped to her tray, a perfectly designed prison of time that her body now refused to obey. "We can only dream of that firm now. Martha," she whispered, resignation heavy in her voice. "These hands can no longer type 100 words a minute, and our bodies wouldn't survive another all-night pitch. The time for that kind of fight is over." The bilateral acknowledgement that their feud had consumed the prime years of their lives, leaving them with only the fragile present, was the true peak of their emotional sharing. The constant reliance on medicine and the failure of their meticulously planned schedules were now tangible evidence of the time lost. Martha was quiet for a long moment, then slowly pulled her phone out from under her pillow. "My daughter Sarah. She's struggling with her own career, trying to make it in this industry we helped create. She needs to hear from me, the real me, not the corporate mask. but I don't know how to write it. It needs to be persuasive, direct but loving. I need to tell her I'm proud despite everything. Eleanor, the master strategist, the wordsmith who once crafted killer proposals that netted millions, felt a genuine, unfamiliar purpose return. Give it to me, Martha. Tell me what you want to say. We'll craft the perfect message. For the first time in 30 years, their combined focus and strategic intelligence were being used not for an act of destruction, but for an act of pure connection and love. Eleanor dictated the opening line, guiding Martha through a difficult, honest confession of regret, sealing their truce with shared purpose. The morning of Eleanor's discharge was bright, a rare cleansing splash of weak Seattle sunshine, finally breaking through the heavy gray clouds. The air felt clean, carrying the crisp scent of the sea and the damp earth. Eleanor was dressed in comfortable but elegantly tailored clothes. She felt lighter both physically after the success of her surgery and more profoundly spiritually after the catharsis of the past 3 days. She was no longer burdened by the immense decades-old weight of hatred. Martha was sitting up watching Eleanor prepare to leave. She looked significantly better than when she arrived, her face calmer, though still marked by fatigue and the signs of her chronic illness. "You're lucky, Eleanor. Get out of here before they find another reason to stick a needle in you," Martha said, a genuine smile unmarred by malice on her lips. Eleanor paused by Martha's bedside, her suitcase resting against the footboard. The email to Sarah was perfect, by the way. Did she respond? Yes. She's coming to visit next week. She used the word real to describe the message. She hasn't used that word with me in years. Thank you, Eleanor. Truly. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed. Martha, I need to do something else. I heard you mention Sarah is struggling to find her footing in digital media. I still have some contacts left at the old firm, the ones you didn't utterly ruin. A slight dry joke, the kind only they could share. I want to help her. Martha raised a hand in protest. Eleanor, you don't owe me anything, especially not favors for my family. I owe myself, Martha. We wasted too much energy fighting a battle that should have been a collaboration. Think of our lost empire, the billions we could have made. That creative vision and strategic execution, they were a perfect match. I want to use my network, the one I built for destruction, for something constructive. Think of it as our joint venture, finally. Eleanor's voice was firm, driven by a deep sense of moral obligation to redeem her past. This spontaneous offer to leverage her reputation, once her most potent weapon for Martha's daughter, was the purest form of redemption through the next generation. It meant that the creative fire and strategic mind that had been extinguished in their bodies would be passed on free of bitterness. Martha's eyes welled up again, but this time with tears of gratitude, not fear or pain. You have truly changed, Eleanor. We both have, Eleanor corrected gently. This room, this hospital, it strips away the titles and the arrogance, leaving just the regret. If we can't build that empire ourselves, maybe we can help the next generation do it without the bitterness and in partnership. This act finalized their profound truce. Eleanor retrieved her laminated schedule, tore it neatly off the tray table, and placed it directly in the waste bin. The gesture was a silent, symbolic surrender of control. Martha looked at Eleanor, a new profound acceptance shining in her eyes. It's a tragedy, isn't it, that it took a hospital bed and the quiet threat of death for us to finally realize that life is too short to waste on hatred. We could have been unstoppable in 1995. Eleanor nodded deeply in agreement. But the lesson is learned, Martha. Late perhaps, but not useless. They sealed their bond with a firm handshake, a gesture of respect finally unburdened by rivalry. Eleanor promised to visit Martha the moment she was back on her feet and discharged. Eleanor left the hospital. The cool, damp air felt clean and fresh. She didn't feel the isolation that had plagued her upon entry. She felt connected. The epilogue. 1 month later. Eleanor sat at a window table in a cozy cafe in Pioneer Square, Seattle, overlooking Elliott Bay. She watched the ferries glide across the gray-blue water. She no longer carried her meticulous planner, only a small, well-worn book. A taxi pulled up outside. Martha, looking much better, healthier, and dressed warmly, emerged. She had a subtle glow about her. She spotted Eleanor, and their eyes met. No longer rivals, no longer enemies, but two women who shared a profound, painful truth and a brand new purpose. Martha walked over, and Eleanor stood to greet her, pulling out the chair. "Eleanor," Martha said, settling in. "Sarah got the promotion. She starts next week. She wanted me to tell you thank you. Tell her thank you, Martha. She gave us a chance to finally do the right thing." The scene faded as the sound of 2 coffee mugs clinking together resonated, followed by a final soft voiceover. The lesson came late, but it was not in vain. We finally found the teammate we had spent our entire lives searching for. It is easy to spend our prime years fighting battles that ultimately fade to dust, only to realize too late that the most precious commodities were the moments we shared and the support we could have offered. The real victory lies not in defeating a rival, but in finding a true connection even at the very end. If this story of late wisdom and second chances resonated with your heart, please share your own reflections in the comments below. Give us a like if you were moved by Eleanor and Martha's journey, and subscribe to Touching Tales to ensure you never miss a tale of human connection. We have a brand new story about finding peace right here on your screen. Click to watch it now.